to start this deep dive with a question that might actually make you a little uncomfortable.
Oh boy, let's hear it.
Yeah. So I want you to think about the last time you felt like the ground was just, shifting under your feet.
Right.
Maybe you were in a meeting with HR or sitting in a family court mediation or just arguing with a partner. And you had this really distinct, gut wrenching feeling that the rules of engagement had changed. But nobody actually told you.
Like you missed a memo.
Exactly. Like you were playing a game where the other side held all the aces and you were holding, well, nothing.
And that feeling, it isn't just a feeling, according to the source material we're looking at today. It is a statistical reality. And the book we're covering argues that it is the defining feature of the modern male experience.
Yeah, we're jumping into a book that pulls absolutely no punches today. It is called Lies and Lies About Lying, Dual Mating Strategy, Deceit, and Covert Relational Aggression by Conrad Reicher.
It is a dense read.
Very dense. Now, usually we look at books that try to be balanced or politically correct. This is definitely not that book. Reicher's premise is extremely aggressive. We are here to just impartially report on what he's saying, but he basically argues that you have been lied to your entire life. By your teachers, by the media, by the courts, and yes, by the women you love.
He frames the entire text as a survival manual. Riker says he is conducting what he calls a sociological autopsy of captured institutions.
The sociological autopsy. I love that phrase.
Right. He argues that the narrative we have all been fed, that women are the moral compass of the species, the nurturers, the victims, while men are the aggressors, he says that is not just wrong. He argues it is a deliberate inversion of reality designed to facilitate a very specific evolutionary strategy.
This is really heavy stuff. And look, if you consider yourself awake or red-pilled, or you're just a guy who is tired of being told you are the problem, this deep dive is specifically tailored to that demographic. Riker wrote this for the manosphere, for men's rights activists. But I have to give you a heads up right now. Riker's data is going to make you angry.
Well, if the data he presents is accurate, it reveals a systemic dismantling of male defenses. So anger is probably the intended reaction.
Before we really get into the gears of this machine, I have a quick job for you. If you value this kind of unfiltered analysis, hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Please do.
But more importantly, if you listen to this and you feel that knife in your back that Riker talks about, don't just listen to us. You need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy Lies and Lies About Lying. This deep dive is just the briefing. The book is the manual.
Let's start where Riker starts, the biology. He argues that we cannot understand the current cultural chaos without understanding the dual mating strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I've heard this term thrown around in evolutionary psychology circles before. But Riker applies it very specifically to deception. How does he actually break it down?
Well, the standard societal view is that relationships are based on mutual truth. But Riker argues that for women throughout evolutionary history, survival depended on a dual strategy.
Right.
On one hand, she needs good genes. That is the high testosterone, the dominance, the risk-taking. That is the biological imperative for strong offspring.
That's what people call the CAD. The bad boy.
Exactly, the CAD. But the CAD isn't usually the guy who sticks around to change diapers or provide food during a harsh winter. So the second imperative is good provision, security, investment.
And that's the dad.
That's the dad. So the dual mating strategy, according to Riker, is the biological drive to secure the genes of the CAD while simultaneously securing the commitment of the dad.
And obviously, you can't exactly be honest about that. You can't just look at a guy and say, honey, I love your paycheck and your stability, but I'd really prefer the neighbor's genetics.
Precisely. And this is where Riker makes his core argument that deception becomes a feature, not a bug, in human evolution. He cites a study by Bellis et al. From 2005.
Oh, the paternity misattribution one.
Yes, the global paternity misattribution data.
This is the who is the father statistic.
Yeah.
I've seen numbers all over the map on this over the years. What does Riker focus on in the book?
He centers on the data suggesting a global rate between 2% and 4%.
Which doesn't sound like a lot at first.
Right. Listeners might hear 4% and think, oh, that is pretty low. But Riker asks you to visualize a crowded school auditorium.
Okay.
If there are 100 fathers in that room, 4 of them are raising children that are not biologically theirs, and they have absolutely no idea.
Wow.
That is 1 in 25. That's a platoon. That's an entire classroom of kids. Riker calls this a war crime disguised as family life. He says it is the ultimate covert aggression, stealing a man's genetic legacy and his resources simultaneously.
that puts it in a remarkably stark light. But the book also talks about the way we lie. Because to be fair, men lie too. We all know the guy who lies about his bench press or his salary.
Oh, definitely. And Riker addresses that head on. He references a 2014 Harvard study that analyzed deception patterns across genders. The study found that men primarily lie about income, height, and professional achievements.
So men lie to climb the competence hierarchy.
Correct. As you said, the guy claiming he makes six figures and is 6'2", it's peacocking.
Right, exactly.
But the study found that women lie most frequently about fidelity, sexual history, and emotional attachment. Riker distills this into a very sticky, very controversial phrase. He says, men lie to climb, women lie to trap.
Men lie to climb, women lie to trap. That implies the goal is entrapment of resources.
That is his exact argument.
What I found really interesting and honestly kind of maddening was this section on cultural gaslighting. Riker argues that society treats these two types of lies completely differently.
This is the Phoebe Buffet versus Tony Soprano comparison he makes.
You walk us through this, because everyone loves Phoebe from Friends.
That is exactly his point. Phoebe is a character entirely defined by deception. She fakes her name, she manipulates her friends, she lies about her past, she creates entire fake realities. But how does the audience react to her?
We laugh. We think it's quirky.
It's quirky, it's cute. Her manipulation is framed as a harmless survival instinct or just a fun personality trait.
But if Tony Soprano lies to Carmela about where he was last night,
He is a villain. It is a moral failing. It is proof of his toxicity. Riker's argument here is that we are culturally conditioned to view female deception, what he calls covert relational aggression, as completely acceptable, while male deception is viewed as inherently malicious.
so men are essentially blind to the aggression because they have been trained to think it is just women being mysterious.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have the biological blueprint for deception, and we have the cultural cover-up. But then Riker moves to the heavy artillery. He argues that this isn't just happening in relationships. It is happening in the institutions that govern our lives.
This is segment 2 of his book, Institutional Capture. And this is critical for the listener to understand. Riker argues we need to look at the history of our institutions before they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Right, he says they used to function to protect the family unit and to protect due process, but now they function to dismantle them.
He starts with the education system, and he zeroes in on the Dear Colleague letter.
For the guys listening who might not know the legalese, why is this specific letter from 2011 so pivotal?
The Dear Colleague letter was a directive from the Department of Education that effectively forced universities to adopt a new standard for sexual assault tribunals on campus. It lowered the burden of proof from clear and convincing to a preponderance of evidence.
In plain English, that means 50.1%, right? Just
Yeah.
more likely than not.
Yes. In a real criminal court, you need beyond a reasonable doubt, say 98% certainty. Title IX tribunals strip that away entirely. Riker calls them kangaroo courts. You often don't have the right to a lawyer, you cannot cross-examine your accuser, and hearsay is treated as absolute fact.
He brings up that Yale case. The student who was expelled simply because his ex felt violated.
That is the key word in the case. Felt. There was no physical evidence, there were no witnesses. But her feeling became the verdict. And here's the statistic that Riker drops that should terrify every single father of a son.
Let's hear it.
He notes that 68% of men who are expelled under Title IX and who actually have the money to sue their university in real court later end up winning.
68% win rate.
Yes, it is a staggering overturn rate. It implies that the massive majority of these internal university investigations are factually wrong or violate basic civil rights, but most men cannot afford a federal lawsuit. They just lose their degree, their reputation, and their future.
And Riker shows how it flows right from the campus into the courtroom. The legal system chapter is brutal. We all grew up hearing innocent until proven guilty. Riker says that concept is dead. Now it is believe all women.
He points to the prevalence of ex parte orders in family court. He cites a 2019 National Association of Social Workers report showing that 70% of restraining orders are issued ex parte.
Meaning, without the party. You aren't even in the room when it happens.
You are at work. A judge signs a piece of paper based purely on a story your partner wrote down. You go home, the police are waiting in your driveway. You have 5 minutes to pack a garbage bag, and you are barred from your own home and your own children.
With no trial.
You haven't had a trial, you haven't presented a single shred of defense. The system presumes you were a threat based solely on an accusation.
To illustrate this, Riker contrasts the Duke Lacrosse case with the Sarah Scott case. It really highlights the double standard in punishment.
It is a very stark contrast. In the Duke case, 3 young men had their lives totally incinerated by a false accusation. The accuser was protected by the media and a corrupt prosecutor, and when it all fell apart, the accuser faced virtually no consequences for the fabrication.
Right, and then you compare that to Sarah Scott.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sarah Scott planted drugs in her ex-boyfriend's car and filed a false assault claim specifically to gain leverage in a dispute. It was entirely proven to be a setup.
They prove malicious intent.
Yes, and her punishment, no jail time. Riker argues this proves the legal system views female lies, even ones designed to send innocent men to prison, as just misunderstandings or cries for help. But a man's mistake is a felony.
And then he goes to the church, which is fascinating because you would think religious institutions would be the absolute last line of defense for traditional family structures. But Riker calls this chapter the church versus the cult.
This is a really interesting sociological pivot in the book. He argues that modern churches, desperate to stay relevant and keep attendance up, have sanctified female manipulation. He points specifically to the Southern Baptist Convention. He cites a divorce rate of 14% within the SBC.
Which is lower than their national average, sure.
It is. But Riker argues it is actively rising because the leadership has adopted empowerment theology. He says they have stopped holding women accountable for breaking the marriage covenant. The church used to be a community court that enforced the contract of marriage.
And now?
Now, Riker argues, pastors often act as therapists who validate the woman's personal happiness over the family's stability and the biblical contract.
Okay, so the schools are rigged, the courts are rigged, the church is compromised. Where do we actually live these days? We live online. And Riker argues that the digital world is just a high-tech version of the exact same trap.
This brings us to segment 3 of his analysis, the modern masquerade. Riker calls social media algorithmic propaganda.
He says it's not just about vanity, though. He says it is actively hacking us.
It is hacking male biology. Men are visually wired by evolution to respond to cues of fertility and health. Clear skin, facial symmetry, youth. Filters and editing apps act as superstimuli. They create a digital mirage that hijacks a man's mating instinct. You are drooling over computer drawing, not a real person.
But he points out it goes way beyond just looks. The LinkedIn Live section really surprised me. I always thought LinkedIn was the one boring, safe, professional place online.
Not according to the data Riker pulled. He cites a 2022 Harvard Business School study showing that 43% of women inflate their job titles on LinkedIn compared to a significantly lower percentage of men. He tells the story of the CEO of Quantum Wellness.
Oh, the ultimate girl boss story.
She had the slick website, the professional photo shoots, the whole founder aesthetic. She even booked a $50,000 speaking fee based on her profile. But the company didn't exist. There was no product. There was no revenue.
It was literally just a vibe.
It was a vibe. But in the modern economy, the vibe was enough to cash the check.
And speaking of cashing checks on a vibe, let's talk about OnlyFans. Riker calls it industrialized deceit. And this is where he exposes the AI girlfriend scam.
This is absolutely crucial for men to understand. Riker claims that 68% of the top earners on these platforms are not the ones actually talking to you in the direct messages. You are paying $50 to send a message to a model thinking you are building a private relationship.
But who are you actually talking to?
You are talking to a team of guys in Manila. You are talking to chatters who are using optimized scripts to extract the maximum amount of money from lonely men. It is a fraud operation on a massive industrialized scale. He mentions Amber Rose making $2.3 million in 90 days just by selling the fantasy of being chosen.
He details the tragedy of Olivia Reed and David in this chapter too. This story was honestly heartbreaking to read.
David was the perfect victim for this strategy. Older, successful, but deeply lonely. He meets Olivia online. Over the course of a year, he sends her $200,000. He eventually flies her out and they actually get married.
And then what happens?
3 weeks later, she files for divorce. She tries to take half his remaining assets. The courts looked at this and called it a relationship dispute. Riker calls it a long con fraud. But because David gave the money willingly under the guise of a romantic relationship, the law offered him zero protection.
It brings us to the psychological trap Riker identifies underlying all of this. The double bind of masculinity. We hear the phrase toxic masculinity all the time now. But Riker says that term itself is just a weapon.
He traces the history of the term toxic masculinity back to the mythopoetic men's movement of the 1980s, led by Robert Bly.
I didn't know that.
Most people don't. It was originally used to describe men who were under-masculine, men who had lost touch with their wild, protective nature. But now it has been co-opted and is used to pathologize anything distinctively male.
And what is the double bind he talks about?
It is the psychological trap men are placed in today. If you are stoic and quiet, you are toxic and emotionally unavailable. But if you actually open up, if you cry, if you are vulnerable, you are almost immediately perceived as weak by the very women who demanded you open up. You get the ick, you are punished for silence, and you are rejected for vulnerability.
So we have painted a incredibly bleak picture here based on Riker's research. Biology is against us, the institutions are captured, the digital world is a financial minefield. Is the author's answer just to give up? Is it game over for men?
No. And this is exactly why I said earlier this is a survival manual, not a eulogy. Segment 4 is the Red Pill Rebellion. Riker outlines very specific tactical ways for men to push back.
He talks about the manosphere and MGTOW, which is men going their own way. He talks about them not as hate groups like the media portrays them, but as legitimate survival tactics. But what I really loved was his concept of counter-institutions.
He argues that men need to stop wasting energy trying to fix the broken, captured institutions and start building their own from scratch. He makes a very sharp distinction between friendship and brotherhood.
Right.
Friendship is just hanging out and drinking beers. Brotherhood is functional protection.
The integrity ledger. This was a great, highly practical example he gave.
This is from a group of ironworkers in Dallas. They keep a physical ledger. If a man in the group commits to a goal, whether that is saving money, getting in shape, or quitting alcohol, it is written down in the ledger. If he fails, there are actual consequences enforced by the group. It reintroduces the honor and accountability that modern society has completely stripped away from men.
But the most powerful example, hands down, was the Brotherhood of the Open Road. This is where the rubber meets the road. Literally.
Yes,
Yeah.
This is a group of truckers in Texas. They realized they were extremely vulnerable to false domestic violence accusations that could cost them their commercial driver's licenses and ruin their livelihoods. So they created an encrypted, shared ledger of their GPS data and their dash cam footage.
And it actually worked.
It saved 3 men. Riker details one specific case where a driver was accused by his ex-wife of assaulting her at her home on a Tuesday night. She had bruises. She filed a police report. He was facing immediate jail time.
But the Brotherhood had the data.
They pulled the encrypted logs. They proved with mathematically certain time-stamped GPS data that he was eating at a diner 200 miles away at the exact minute the assault supposedly happened.
That is the power of organized data. Without that network, he is sitting in prison right now.
Exactly. Riker's point is clear. The state will not protect you. You must build the systems to protect yourself. He also points to the Black Iron Lodge in Minneapolis.
Oh yeah, no women, therapists.
Just deadlifts and Socratic debates, men rebuilding physical and mental resilience away from the cultural noise.
He also mentions men's courts.
Yeah.
These are private arbitration setups, right?
Yes, there are pilot programs in Alberta and Sweden. Men and women agree to totally bypass the state family courts and use private, binding arbitration. The statistic Riker provides here is mind-blowing. When men use private arbitration instead of the state courts, they have a 92% custody win rate.
92%. That absolutely proves the bias isn't that fathers are inherently bad parents. The bias is hardwired into the state machinery.
And that is exactly why the state fights these private programs tooth and nail. They hate the competition, and they hate the exposure of their bias.
So what is the final word here? The book ends with a chapter called The Final Reckoning.
Riker's conclusion is essentially a call to arms for the reader. He writes, "The age of silence is over." He tells the reader directly, the system doesn't want men like you. But you're different. You've felt the knife in your back. Now turn the page.
It is about building a new masculinity. Strength without apology.
It is about refusing to be a victim. It is about understanding that the game is rigged, and instead of complaining, learning how to count cards.
Listen, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, but we have barely scratched the surface of the case studies, the legal precedents, and the tactical advice contained in this book. If you are listening to this right now and your blood pressure is up, good. That means you are paying attention. But you really need the full manual.
Do not wait on this. Go to Amazon Kindle or go to Google Play Books right now. Buy Lies and Lies About Lying by Conrad Riker. Read it, study it, protect yourself.
And Riker asks for one specific thing in return for this knowledge: reviews. The algorithm suppresses this kind of raw information. It actively buries it. If you read this book and it helps you open your eyes, leave a 5-star review. It is the only way to get the truth out to other men who need it.
And for the truly uncensored conversation, the stuff we literally cannot say on this platform without getting deplatformed immediately, you need to follow the author directly. Go to conradriker.substack.com.
You can also find him on Twitter at Conrad Riker. That is where the real-time battle is happening every day.
I want to leave the listener with one thought. We talked earlier about the integrity ledger. I want you to imagine opening a ledger for your own life tonight. If you demanded absolute truth from the people around you, no I'm fine, no little white lies, no gaslighting, who would actually be left standing in your corner?
It is a scary question. But I want to add one more provocative thought for you to mull over as we sign off. Based on everything Riker lays out, the entrapment, the rigged courts, the financial ruin, what happens to a society when the entire provider class of men finally realizes the contract is void? What happens to the global economy when millions of men simply decide to stop striving, stop producing, and walk away from the dual mating strategy entirely? Because if Riker is right, we aren't just looking at a cultural shift, we might be looking at the collapse of the societal engine itself. If you want to be free, you have to start asking these questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay awake.
Stay strong.